Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into an ancient epic to uncover an absolute masterclass in strategy, psychology, and covert warfare. Honestly, this story feels exactly like a modern espionage thriller, but it's pulled straight from the pages of ancient history. We're going to see how some of the greatest minds and warriors of their time tackled an absolute brick wall of a problem using nothing but their wits, a flawless disguise, and raw physical power. Imagine facing an impossible problem like the one our source material presents us with today. How do you defeat a literally invincible king? Well, the answer is surprisingly counterintuitive. You leave the army behind. Let's take a look at how three ancient heroes planned the ultimate Black Ops mission, realizing that when overwhelming force fails, calculated stealth is the only option you have left. Here's our mission briefing for today. We'll be breaking this down into three main phases. First, the ultimate covert mission. Second, securing the commander's strategic blessing. And third, the disguise and enemy infiltration. Okay, phase one, the ultimate covert mission. Let's jump right in and take a look at our completely impossible target, King Jarasandha of Magadha. Krishna, the mastermind of this operation, opens the briefing by laying out the terrifying reality of their target. King Jarasandha is completely incapable of being vanquished in battle. The ancient text actually emphasizes that even if all the celestials and asuras, basically the gods and demons of this universe, were to team up and fight him together, they still couldn't beat him in a conventional war. So Krishna explains that since a regular army is just going to fail against this invincible monarch, they have to resort to a surgical, unarmed strike. So who do you send on a mission like this? Krishna divides the labor by hand-picking a highly specialized three-man crew to accomplish what entire armies can't. He builds an ancient Black Ops team where every single member brings a super distinct, critical element to the table. You've got Krishna providing the policy and wisdom, Bhima bringing the raw strength and muscle, and Arjuna representing triumph and elite skill. It's all about synergy. Just look at this quote from Krishna. In me is policy, in Bhima is strength, and in Arjuna is triumph. It's such a brilliant way to describe how they operate. It's brains, brawn, and flawless execution working together in absolute secrecy. Literally, none of them could pull this off solo, but as a unit, they form an unmatched weapon. Right, so how exactly does this weapon strike? Here is the assassination pitch straight from our source, and it relies entirely on psychology. First, they have to sneak up on the monarch in absolute secret. Second, they need to force him into a personal struggle with bare arms, no weapons allowed. Third, and this is the absolute genius part, Krishna plans to use the king's own pride, covetousness, and fear of disgrace to trick him into choosing Bhima, their heavy hitter, for the duel. And finally, Bhima slays him like death itself. They're literally turning the king's massive ego into his greatest vulnerability. Moving on to phase two, the commander's strategic blessing. Let's see what happens when the commander, Yudhishthira, reacts to this incredibly daring pitch. You might expect some hesitation about sending his absolute best men on a suicide mission, right? But nope, the verdict is in, and Yudhishthira entirely agrees to the plan. But instead of just saying yes and wishing them luck, he delivers this profound lesson in ancient political science. He notes that troops, even elite ones, are completely useless if they aren't properly led. A force without an experienced leader is entirely inert. He recognizes that Krishna's wisdom is the real engine that's going to drive this mission to success. The why of it all is captured beautifully in these metaphors from the text. Yudhishthira says, the wise always conduct the water into places that are low, which essentially means exploit the path of least resistance. Then he adds, fishermen cause the water to run out through holes, meaning you have to exploit the loopholes and weak points of your enemy. This explains exactly why covert ops work. You don't waste your energy trying to bash down an indestructible wall. You find the tiny cracks and you slip right through them. To make sure this infiltration is totally flawless, Yudhishthira sets up a strict chain of command. Arjuna, the unparalleled warrior, has to follow Krishna, who represents policy and wisdom, and Bhima, the powerhouse of raw strength, has to follow Arjuna. It's a highly disciplined hierarchy designed so that policy, good fortune, and raw might flow predictably downward to guarantee success. Which brings us to phase three, disguise and enemy infiltration. The mission is greenlit, the strategy is locked in, and now our team actually has to execute this behind enemy lines. To get into the kingdom without tripping any alarms, They dress up as Snataka Brahmanas. Now, Snataka Brahmanas are a class of wandering, peaceful religious scholars. Think about that cover story for a second. These are three guys built for absolute war, and they have to hide their massive physical presence and warrior instincts beneath modest robes, just walking around delivering agreeable speeches. The psychological tension of this setup is just wild. On the surface, you have the cover, peaceful scholars in modest garb. But underneath, you have the reality. These are unvanquished heroes. The text describes their bodies as blazing like the sun, the moon, and the fire, completely inflamed with deep wrath at how Jarasandha has treated their allies. Can you even imagine the sheer willpower it took to suppress that kind of burning rage and stroll quietly through enemy territory? And this wasn't just a quick hop over the border. Tracking their rapid, stealthy movement reveals this massive geographical journey. They start in Kurujangala, hustle over the Kalakuta hills, cross huge rivers like the Gandaki and Sarayu, tear through eastern Kosala and Mithila, and then traverse the Ganges and the Son rivers before heading deep into the east. It is a relentless, laser-focused march straight toward their target. Finally, after traversing all that treacherous terrain in disguise, the operatives hit the high ground. They reach the hills of Garatha, and from that vantage point, they look down upon the heart of Kushamva, directly at their enemy's domain. The target is finally in sight. What they're looking at below them is the formidable city of Magadha. The source notes it's a remarkably wealthy place, always packed with cattle, which was a major symbol of wealth in the ancient world. It's loaded with water resources and filled with beautiful trees. So they aren't walking into some barren wasteland. They are walking into the highly resourced, heavily guarded jewel of an invincible king's empire. That makes the stakes of their bare-handed assassination attempt infinitely higher. They're at the gates. The infiltration is complete. They have slipped like water through the cracks of Jarasandha's defenses. But this tactical setup leaves us with one incredibly provocative question. What happens when the scholarly disguise finally comes off and three wrathful warriors stand bare-handed before an invincible king? Well, thank you for joining me for this explainer. I hope this breakdown of ancient covert strategy leaves you just as fascinated by the timeless nature of these tactics as I am. Keep exploring and keep questioning how the impossible gets done.